I am Obu Herero. Obu Herero is a person who is a Herero, what you call Herero. And Ova Herero is the plural version of that. I was born in Namibia to the line of ancestry that I will tell you about in a moment. But the beginning for me is Vincent, actually. I'm so grateful to Vincent for having made this documentary, and I think he told the story of my people so authentically. He didn't edit out anything, right down to my cousin asking whether she needs a necklace or not. And so really thank you so much. And my nephew is here, I'll talk about those in a moment, my people who are here. And the reason why I single out my nephew is because it's a continuity thing, it's a legacy. You know, you would have seen this. Hopefully he's gonna get hold of it and keep it so that his children too can see it one day. And so it goes down the line. My kids are too young to see it right now. So thanks to you, Vincent. I also wanted to say, I sat there in that corner with a sense of pride. And this is for two reasons. The first is that I come from a family that was, well, there's a gentleman there, I can't say the word. But I come from a family of stirrers. And sometimes it wasn't always easy growing up as a child, because people had opinions and they would express them, and sometimes they would go to jail, or other times they would have to go into exile. And I feel specifically proud of the number of people who are related to me directly that you saw in this documentary. One of them is my grandfather, the older gentleman, as in like my mother's dad. The older gentleman who was explaining what it must have felt like to be raped. That's my mother's father. The lady who said she doesn't close her eyes when she's praying because that's not a plan. That's my cousin. The gentleman at the graveside who was basically throwing the truth at the German tourists in Namibia, that's my uncle. Some of the ladies who were in the streets protesting, one of them was my mother. Another one is a late aunt of mine, Auntie Kashu. Who did I forget? Those are the ones I was able to pick up. I have no doubt there were more, especially in the streets and away from cameras. So I feel proud of that, generally. And I also feel proud for a second reason, which is that the course continues generation after generation. I was somehow recruited, brainwashed into even agreeing to be here today by my family. It wasn't a plan. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you fight for what's right, and that's what we do. So that's the general introductory remark that I have before I get to the content of what we've seen this evening. But there is a few people who are here, I'm sorry Vincent, I must mention because it's so special to me.
Doctor, this is your platform.
So there is a Herero woman there. Her name is Ingeborg von Lichtenstein. She looks white. Inge, you've got to stand so people can see your whiteness. And my nephew is right behind her, Kian von Lichtenstein. And Simon is my cousin. I have no idea where Simon came from. He lives in Namibia. I don't know. He just walked through the door. I don't know. And then two of our friends, Mika and Nell. I know the surname is Nell. Edmund. So thanks for coming in, for being here. I think it's nice to have people, Basekaya, so that I don't lie. Because they will check the facts.
Yeah.
All right. So on to the business. I like that the documentary ends with a quest for reparations in 2016. So what then happens after that is probably what people might want to hear. So what happened in 2017 was that my people launched a lawsuit, a case rather, in the US. The Americans have an act called the Alien Tort Statute, which enables process to be instituted in American courts by foreigners for violations of human rights, international law, basically. So my people tried that against the German government. They did it in their own right because, as you heard, the Namibian government wasn't really able and or prepared to come to the party. There were 3 issues before the court. The one was sovereign immunity, and it was whether Germany had immunity as a sovereign state to be sued in an American court. The other was whether an American court had jurisdiction. In other words, whether it had the powers ultimately to decide a case like that. The third issue, which was really the meat of it, was reparations. And people wanted reparations from Germany. The case was chucked out in 2019. I believe it was the 2nd of November. For the reason that Germany, so the court found that Germany was a sovereign stakeholder, and that Germany had not consented to being sued in the US court. So on that basis, the court had no jurisdiction, basically. So that was the end of that. And that decision obviously has implications for many other nation states or peoples. We talk a lot about transitional justice, and that's a buzzword that we throw around, we write about, we get PhD about. But what does it really mean, and what does it do, and how do we attain such a thing, both at the macro international level, as well as at the micro community level? I mean, we've got our own struggles in South Africa, so we know what that even means or looks like. So that, I think, is one of the implications of that case, and the decision at least. So where are we now? As at today, the German government has not paid reparations for the genocide at all. They're not going to, at least not tomorrow. But in May 2021, German officials recognized that what was committed in Namibia at the turn of the century was genocide. They then pledged, I think it was 1.1 billion euros, you correct me there, Simon, 1.1 billion euros to be paid out in over 30 years. Right. But that's not all. But it's not reparations, though. It's not reparations. It's called, I think, development aid is the word they use. I wrote down notes so I don't forget what I'm saying, but now I'm so they refused to pay reparations. They gave this to the government, not even to the people who were affected, who were clearly identified in the extermination order. And this whole proposal of €1 billion, money, whatever, is intended as a gesture for reconciliation rather than a formal form of reparations. I pause there to reflect on something I've argued elsewhere before. It's Wallace Soyinka, I don't know if some of us, your artists, would have done his plays and so on, you know. He wrote a book called, you're his son.
He's done the play.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Wale wrote a book called The Burden of Memory, The Muse of Forgiveness. And in that book, I think the beginning, he says, you know, reparations, the idea of paying them, exercises us from repeating what we did in the past. And I think by refusing to pay reparations, and to call it that, Germany is basically telling us that it is intending on repeating history. You heard the woman who was saying, what is our problem? They had the same experience in Zimbabwe, and people didn't behave so badly. So that seems to me to be a clear indication that there is no plan whatsoever to cease behaving that way from the part of Germany. In May 2021 as well, a document called the United in Remembrance of Our Colonial Past, United in Our Will to Reconcile, United in Our Vision of the Future. That whole thing is the title of the document. It's known colloquially as the Joint Declaration, or JD. Was finalized, and this was intended to be between the Namibian government and the German government. And a quick overview is that there are three parts to the JD. The one is a historical acknowledgement of what Germany did in Namibia to the Overhead Nama people. The second is an apology, where the German government extends an apology to Namibia, the country, and the descendants of the victims, expressing deep regret for atrocities committed during the colonial era. That's quite broad. And then the third part relates to this 1.1 billion euros that I spoke about earlier, which is not reparations, but some kind of a gesture to make it all go away and kiss it better. In, I think, April this year, and again, Simon, you've got to correct me there, the German president came to Namibia and expressed a desire to officially apologize for the genocide. And he may or may not have, I'm sure he did, some public information will go on after that. But the JD was never signed. And it wasn't signed because it's been criticized in more corners than one. One of the criticisms is that it excludes the affected communities. It seems to be these international relations, bilateral liaisoning between Germany and Namibia. And the criticism, not by me, is that it excludes affected communities and they ought to be brought to the table because they were identified by name and they have descendants. And the second criticism is that is Germany's evasiveness and, quite frankly, arrogance in refusing to pay reparations, and actually call it that, to the people, engage them, and so on. It also hasn't been signed for a third reason, which is that it was challenged in court in Namibia last year, and that decision is still outstanding. So the declaration is up in the air. And the foot soldiers continue to fight and struggle for reparations. Unfortunately, there is a lot of strife and division amongst the affected communities themselves, because you have got people who agree with the position adopted basically by the governments of the two countries, that this should be done at the level of international relations. And they want to forge ahead with it. There's actually a group that went to Germany recently, but I'm not quite sure what they want to do there. So that's unfortunate. And then one last point I want to mention, which might be of interest in the context of this, is that tomorrow there is a delegation of people going to Germany. My grandfather is one of them. So I asked him, I said, look, why are you going to Germany? He said, they got word from a researcher that there are more skulls. They found this.
Yeah, last time I was in Germany, there were more skulls in private homes.
Yes.
Okay.
No, this is exactly it though. Like, so they are going. No, there's not. You want the money, like in your home. Why is this skull in your house? So they are going because there's more skulls, and they are going to try and retrieve all of these skulls. Yeah, they're leaving tomorrow morning actually. So that was my general, very broad overview of what I thought you might be interested in thinking about with me.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Doctor, for giving us an overview. Ladies and gentlemen, I will open the floor, but maybe before I do that, just give you a bit of background with me and the film, and as a filmmaker. I'm often asked if I'm Namibian and why did I make this film. And it always catches me by surprise, that question, but it always happens. And which is, it's weird to me every time I hear people asking me that question. because I thought it would be natural that if there was an injustice somewhere, a filmmaker who would regard themselves as progressive would have an interest in it. But I've come to learn that also it's quite surprisingly for many people when a young black filmmaker takes a political issue that's not related to a South African township or apartheid, it's always a surprise. So the backstory is, I was on the flight going somewhere and I saw a book, a magazine, an in-flight magazine, and I opened it and I saw this black woman dressed in a Victorian dress, and they said, oh, this is a Herero traditional dress. And I thought, oh, traditional dress, but why does it look Victorian? With an inquisitive mind, I learned that there was a genocide in Namibia. Well, I'm fast forwarding the story. I was a bit embarrassed by the fact that I didn't know that there was a genocide in Namibia, and I had regarded myself as a progressive filmmaker that reads, that knows about the happening of the world. And ever since that thing really, there's a saying that when they say the film calls you and it stays with you, no matter how much you try to avoid it, it stays with you. So it stayed with me for a couple of years, like 2 years, until I thought, let me make an effort in telling this story. Just like any other process that we follow in South Africa, we ask for funding. But from a broadcaster to the foundation, everywhere I knocked, and they said, no, there is no story. Because back then, even Germany was refusing that there are skulls that were in Germany. But I then went on my own, with my own money. Don't ask me why. Something called me, and I followed my instinct, and I went. I didn't even have a character until somebody said, oh, you have to go to the University of Namibia. There's this old lady who likes to protest. If you go to her, she'll connect you to the people. And that was our central character there, Uchiwa. And I went to her, she welcomed me with open arms, and there was something so homely. I mean, this is gonna sound cliche, but she was like a mother. And I felt so comfortable in her presence, and we formulated a relationship. And fast forward, I spent the 7 years going back and forth between Johannesburg and Namibia, trying to tell a story. And during that time, I formulated a relationship. It ended up not being about the film, but I was just like drawn to the story and fascinated with the story. And Nyoko was talking about everybody there is their cousin. I then learned that every Herero people are in one way or the other related. And the reason is, during the genocide, Hereros used to be one of the majority ethnic groups in Namibia, but 80% of them were literally killed. And then some 10% left to go to Namibia, some to Botswana, and some in South Africa. In fact, recently I live in Taung, in a village. There's a community of Herero people that lives in Vryburg. So Herero spread across Southern Africa, and only few were left in Namibia. So the relation, that's why it's easy for them to be connected. At least that's my observation. So why do I tell these stories? Because when I started making films, it wasn't about me trying to be a filmmaker, but more how we can use films as a tool. And for me, this film is a great justification of that idea, because it's been more than 8 years, and every year this film is either showing in Europe, in America, South America, including in Asia, because the topic that we are touching on are very universal. And having said that, I'd like to bring you back in, Dr. Nyo. And I know you and I have spoken about what are the similarities with the Namibian genocide and what is happening all over the world, South Sudan, but I guess the most prominent is the Palestine and Israel conflict.
So I will begin when we actually have this. I want to start with the Sudanese conflict at the moment, and quite frankly, genocide. A lot of us are hearing a lot more and consuming a lot more about what's going on in the Gaza, which I'll get to in a moment because that's quite atrocious. But one of the similarities and the reason why I began with Sudan is there was a genocide happening and people are still learning about it today. I took an Uber here and my Uber driver said, "Oh, where are you going?" So I started to explain where I'm going because I was in a bit of a hurry. He'd never heard of it. He'd never heard of the Herero people before. He'd never heard of anything. So there is also a genocide happening in Sudan, but don't know about it. I was in high school in 1994 when the Rwandan genocide was going on. We didn't hear about it. It was just right there under our noses and no one was really talking about it. I think that's one of the immediate similarities. But what is also a similarity and somewhat ironic, though, is what's going on in Palestine at the moment, because the Israelis and the Herero people have in common a perpetrator of genocide, who were both genocided by the Germans, right? And the irony for me lies in the fact that Israel is now in turn doing it to Palestinians. But that is, of course, you've been consuming a lot of that. But it's the quietness of it, and just quietly exterminating people.
And I feel tempted to ask another question, but I'm going to open it up to the floor and say, we'll start with an nephew.
Vincent, can I just make one intervention before we go into it? There are people here who have tickets for the Sobukwe play. It's starting at 7:30, not at 7. So you don't have to feel a rush to be here. We have until 7:15 if you want that amount of time. So it just gives people to move on. And the last one is Mora, which is the musical performance this evening as part of the festival. If there's anybody here who wants tickets, comps, would you either let one of us know or just collect them at the window at the end after 7:15?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have to speak louder.
Can we find similarities in how genocide happens to our people through the use of like barbaric slavery and just inhumane actions in Congo, Sudan? I know in China, I think it's Toshigi, near the borders of Russia and Eastern Europe, there's another genocide happening to Muslims, I think Turkish-like people. Is there a correlation with resources and, let's say, a small population and how they are used by bigger nations or bigger ethnic groups and colonial powers that really pushes genocide and just inhumane acts without any consideration of other people?
So I'm going to take a step back and say that a lot of us know a lot about the Holocaust. I mean, it has a name, it's called the Holocaust. You know? The tactics that gassing, the hanging, the concentration camps, all of it. He learned from what happened in Namibia to the Herero people, quite literally. So that's one of the tactics that was used there, and I think as the course of history unfolds, people have learned to ignore the starvation of what's going on right now, for example, in the Middle East, and cutting people off at the source, the cutting of people's water sources, shooing away people, for example, gift of the givers as trying to bring sustenance to a community. So very much so. Yes, the tactics are very much the same. I'm no researcher of history, but historians will narrate that a lot of those were in fact learned from what the Germans did and refined over time.
In fact, drawing from the film, I'll say, you know, the obvious thing is, first of all, there's a fight for resources. And one of the most unfortunate things is that Africa is, as a continent, has abundance of resources. Land is one of them. And so, and also another disadvantage is that we were very kind people in welcoming visitors who clearly had bad intentions. And because of our nature as Africans, people took advantage of it. In recent history, it may not be so in terms of how people welcome strangers. So the monster is a little bit more aggressive in how they project their dominance and how they take if they want. And whether they do it legally or illegally. Which brings me to another subject that I really want to bring Dr. Nyoko in, because she's a sharp legal mind. Often, which is common, is that the people that are setting these rules, these laws, are the very same people who are perpetrators. And so even if you try to be decent and you want to use the rule of law to get to justice, you never will. And that's very much common with what we see in Palestine, with the case that South Africa has taken. So my question is, it's almost like, you know, the fact that South Africa managed to win in terms of recognizing that there's a possible genocide that's happening in Palestine. It has gotten worse. It hasn't stopped. No one cares about the rules. So there's a double standard there. So that's a sharp similarity for me. And the question is now, should we follow the law? And what is the future of the rules of law in the world, in the universe? And that's really a big question for me.
You see, I think all of these things that you pull together, Vincent, demonstrate. Am I going to call you Mr. Maloina?
I never call a doctor.
Never.
So
what is happening?
In public, I have to call a doctor.
But what you're pointing to demonstrate the finite nature of law. Law ends. At some point, there is no more law. It's finished. There's just no more. And what happened to this case, like to the New American case, was law ended. There was no more law, right? What is going on with the South Africa versus Israel case is that there is law, but it's got no teeth. So it's basically the uselessness of the law, said a lawyer. You know, it just doesn't help you. It's not able to help you, but where do you take it? My grandpa says in the video, because he was also got a bit of stirrer, he says, you know, you're forcing us to take it to the streets and to take the law into our own hands. And I think what he's saying there is, he's not excluding violence, I know this man. But what he's also saying there is, if you need to legitimize the struggle on the street, because that's where it's at, people will rise up. Because the law is not doing what it's supposed to do, or it has finished. There's no more left.
Just an observation in your film, Vincent. There's a lot of absence of young people. I don't see young people in that film. And yet there's a mention of the next generation. And I've been to Namibia, and that's the sense you get each time you go there. Windhoek, absence of black people, Katutura, the same, what's going on there? I mean, perhaps...
There are no black people in Katutura, sir.
No, I'm saying in Windhoek, not Katutura. Katutura is Soweto. Huh?
Katutura is in Windhoek. I think, are you talking
Well,
about...
it's just like South Africa. I mean, Soweto and Joburg, you know exactly what I mean.
So, if I may,
Okay.
you
Yeah.
why there are no young people in
Yes, maybe let me start. Do you wanna?
No, you
Let me
make
explain
yourself very young
the,
people.
the young. Actually, I was very excited to see you there and hear you speak like that, because I did want young people, and the truth is that young people were not involved. There was a youth leader amongst those young people, but which was the character, but there's a general fatigue by young people to fight things like this. And so she was a character, and next time I went to Namibia, she wasn't there. And next time I come, she's there. And the next 2, 3, 4 trips, she's not there. And so there was an inconsistent in terms of me finding a character. But the truth is, young people were not involved. But now, with the EFF, Namibia, you see how it's led by mostly young people. And I think it's the same thing that happened in South Africa. In fact, that most young people post-apartheid, 2010, weren't really interested in politics. There was fatigue when it comes to politics. And I know, because I've also done a film in Botswana, it was a similar thing. But now it's changing. More young people are aware that for the future to be better than what it was, they have to take action. And we saw in South Africa with the Fismal's Fall movement. However, I will say, and I have no evidence of this, I feel like there's a concerted effort in making sure that young people don't get involved in politics and they get preoccupied with other things.
I also think that from the perspective of this documentary film, the genocide, the talk around the Ovaherero genocide, in the early 2000s, I remember, I think I may have attended the second or third meeting, where it was coming on to 2004, which would have been the centenary. And I remember my grandfather saying, we can't just let this go by without actually educating ourselves about what happened. It's not enough for us to sit in our villages, in our homesteads, and know that Auntie Ingi's dad was a white man, and then you carry on, right? So there needed to be a more consolidated education which happened. It actually started with one of the former chiefs, Koi Marirako, who passed away. You may have seen him in the documentary. He passed away recently now, 9 years ago. And so people needed to first of all understand what happened. And that went from like to block to block to block. And when people finally have come to terms with what is and happened to us, you're getting the agency. You're getting the agency. And I also think that when you were interviewing Bushua in 20, I mean, they are not that old, right? And her daughter, okay, is quite involved. So they might not be on the forefront as people who don't know quite what happened, but they are there in the background. And they are not ignorant to it. Simon, what do you think?
I had a hand up.
Yeah. Is it on this matter? Because there's a gentleman there, but if it's on this matter, we can let you speak on it, and then because he might have a different.
Yeah, it's on that matter and other things.
Okay, let's go.
So maybe the gentleman that has a hand up, maybe has an item.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a quick one.
Yeah.
I guess it's got a legal thing to it and an economic thing. It's two-pronged. So 1.3 billion euros is not a lot of money, obviously. Especially not after preparation.
Yeah.
So I'm asking that what is Namibia's GDP? Do you have an idea?
I actually don't know what Namibia's GDP is at the moment.
Okay. Then okay, let's leave that. I'll ask them this other question. having probably spoken to other people, Vincent as well, and you, Doctor, sorry, I was going to call you Doctor. Do you now politically, or you have a sense of why Germany wouldn't pay, because they can? And beyond the idea of arrogance, do you think that there is probably a strategic reason that is political and not economic, because it can't be economic, that they're not paying? And I'm curious, what do you think it is? Because they could just pay.
No. So there are quite a few reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, they are my reasons. Germany has never telephoned you to say.
Okay, cool.
One
Rotate,
is that, so Germany, as you recall, colonized different African nations.
Yes.
Right? And I think a part of it stems from the fear of setting a precedent, number one. Number two, nobody really cares about Africa. I'm sorry to say this again. So there was actually reparations by Germany. I can't recall which country it was, not Africa, don't guess whether it was. It wasn't. For colonialism. But it just won't pay Africans. It's not going to do it. The president, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty much, if we have to call it a spade, it's quite racist take. And on the other hand, the excuse is that it will open a can of worms.
The issue of land.
The issue of land. In fact, that's another topic, just to say, in the film, we didn't put it here, but the majority of land in Namibia, significant amount of it is still owned by Germans, who most of them are not even living in Namibia. Yeah. So.
Yeah, so just setting context, as Guerrero as they come. And I mean, you see how I look like. I mean, I don't look like a typical African. So basically, I'm a third generation German carpenter sort of generation in there. And I was actually born in Botswana. So my mother was one of those, or my grandmother was one of those that survived the trek to Botswana, and my mother was born that side. And then my father was born from a generation of raised German poor lady. And somehow I'm here. So that's the context. In terms of the youth not involved, even I'm 45 years this year, and I'm still learning and really getting to really research and understand. Maybe the stories, our culture is, the history is passed on, it's oral. Around fire, you can told the stories of why you look the way you look, why Granny looks like the way they look. The context to it was very difficult to grasp so early that, where did the Germans come from? Why were they here? And sometimes there was a bit of pride as well to be associated with Germans. It's like, German looking than other people, all these things. So it takes a while. And I think really thanks to you and your film, and the new generation, they don't have the opportunity to actually get this oral history that we got. They have films to look at, and they actually get their awareness and really want to get their work up and take on.
Thank you so much. By the way, I appreciate what you said. This is one of my most successful films. And when I first started, the fact that people said there is no story, there is no film, it's still like, I still don't understand. But I'll also be honest that I don't know why I was drawn to it so much. Even in retrospect, I can't quite make sense of it, why I kept going back. And eventually we managed to find money from the National Film and Video Foundation to finish it. But a big chunk of it was literally me just taking a flight when I'm bored, and then with a camera, and sleeping at her cousin's dining room and her mom's house. I literally became part of the family. And when the kids woke up, sometimes they find me on the couch sleeping. They're like, oh, Uncle Vincent is here. Okay, and the camera bag. In fact, it was the camera bag that would tell them that I'm here.
Vincent, sorry, we made a bit of a blue. The Sobukwe Place starts now. So those who have tickets for that, will you make your way up there, please? We'll end here at 15:15, and then Mora is at 7:30.
Okay, we'll take you later, we'll be short as well, for those who are staying.
Right.
Thank you for being here and for telling us your story. So I'm curious.